The next panel will take place in English, so if you need translation, just use your mobile devices, please. My name is Pavel Usvatov. I'm representing the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation, and I will be the moderator for the next hour. So warm welcome to our panelists. In the panel, 2 years of application of the GDPR, empowering individuals to control their data. First, I want to greet Teemu Ropponen from My Data Global International, a non-profit organization that has the purpose to empower individuals by improving their right to self-determination regarding personal data. To my left, we have Frederick Richter, CEO of Stiftung Datenschutz, Data Protection Foundation, German Data Protection Foundation, that has the task to raise the awareness of data protection among citizens and within the society in general. To my right, we have Mathias Pffefer, a journalist and producer and co-author of a recently published book, Prinzip Mensch, about power, freedom, and democracy in the age of the artificial intelligence. This book that I'm holding here is in German, but within the next 2 months there will be an English version appearing, so feel free to go back to it. I'll put it. It's not a sign of disrespect, but I just don't have more space here.
It's fine.
And our fourth panelist over video stream is Paul-Olivier Dehaye, the founder of personaldata.io, an NPO focused on making data protection rights individually actionable and also collectively useful. So a warm welcome to all of you. My first question goes to all panelists, and just to start with, we talked about the evaluation report of the GDPR already today or yesterday. So what is your general opinion about the GDPR, about the application of GDPR in the last 2 years? Does it empower citizens to anything, to control their data, to be aware of their data? And why or why not, in your opinion? So, who wants to start? Yes?
Well, thank you. As a lawyer, you always look at the law first. I think that's in your nature and profession. So, I want to have a look at the GDPR. And of course, there is, on the one hand, the content of the law. It has progressions, it has shortcomings, of course. It is nothing totally new in Europe. When you come from the continental Europe view on data protection, which is something else than the international idea of privacy. And but you also have to look at the structures and at the enforcement of the law, because every law, any law, is only as good as its enforcement. Otherwise, it will not provide users, with the impact it promises on the paper. So Max Schrems put it like that this year. The GDPR is only as strong as the weakest DPA that enforces it. That is why the practical effect of the law, the practical benefit that it offers to people, to users, strongly depends on the way it is enforced, it is understood, it is explained and interpreted. And that raises questions on the structures. Nadine Schön, the deputy leader of the CDU fraction in the German Bundestag, raised the question of how it might be aligned, those interpretations of GDPR that we have in Europe and in Germany. And she supposed to centralize the authorities. Because when you look at France, they have a central data protection authority with 200 staffers and a budget of 20 million euros. And in Germany, we have 1,000 people enforcing GDPR with a budget of 85 million euros. that could mean that we are 5 times stronger than France by enforcing GDPR. But in Germany, this workforce is fragmented into 18 authorities. And of course, this is an issue. We have to talk about how to use this power, we have in Germany. But aside those rather structural questions, we of course have to look at that the law provides to people. And when we ask, are people empowered, already empowered? I would say not yet fully. They are legally empowered by the law. When you look at the law, when you look at those strong rights GDPR offers to people, you have the right to access to rectification of data a company has, the right to deletion if there is no legal ground anymore to possess and use this data, the only new right to port your data, to have your data ported from one company to another, also known as the right to data portability or data mobility, as some might call it. But this is only on paper. And when you ask people, do you feel empowered with those strong rights you have from the law? People say, I have to take action, I have to show initiative, I have to act, I have to take time and efforts to get really in this control that is promised to me. So I think in a legal view they are empowered, but in a practical view, not yet. They would need help by whatever, by institutions, by people, or by technology. You also can think of those privacy agents, those personal information management services or systems that are proposed by some players since years and also promoted by My Data initiative. And this is a very promising way to go to more practical empowerment. And of course, this needs funding, because this is only at the beginning, this movement and their players. It needs also political support, and this is something the Commission shall do in future, I think.
Thank you very much. So now we had a look at the legal side, and we will turn to the, I would say, can you say human side? So yes. Mathias, please.
Yes, let's try it. A lot is said already, and I totally agree. But from me with a media background, I would maybe have another angle to it, or in addition to it. So I think you mentioned Max Schrems, and he's a wonderful example for a citizen who was empowered and who showed in public how much you can be empowered by the GDPR. So it's a very, very good instrument that we have there. It's a new gold standard for the data policy worldwide, and it forces really the big companies, or it should force them to act in this way. But they don't do. And I mean, we see no action of the EU Commission so far after this Privacy Shield, the stop of the Privacy Shield, and we didn't see it before even when the other safe harbor case was on. So I mean, I'm wondering, why doesn't the EU react to this justification? And what we need to empower people is that politics makes a very good example in this, and that they show that fundamental rights is nothing, minor or something we can laugh about, whatever. We have a very strong concept of that here in Europe, and we have to force these enterprises to stay to the law and to keep close to the law. And in our book, for example, we had a look in this ecosystem a little bit deeper, and we tried to find out, what drives them, what makes them so powerful. We've already heard that the 7 most valuable enterprises of the world are in this business. But what is their business model actually? I mean, we always hear that data is the new oil and so on. But if you look at it, it's not only data. It's the personal behavior, the private thoughts, the private emotions of every one of us, of individuals almost everywhere around the world, which is collected, transformed into data, and then transformed into models of a prediction, which are then sold on a marketplace, on a so-called, as Shoshana Zuboff called it, behavioral future market. And this model is so strong because nobody else is using it and nobody else has the data power to use it like these big companies can do it. And it's completely illegal to GDPR standards. It's completely illegal. So they make their money and they build their power on a complete illegal business model. And we should force them if they want to stay active here. I mean, Facebook announced recently that they will leave Europe. I think that's a good idea. If they won't stay to the standards that we have here, they should better leave, and they should open up for other companies who are staying close to law. I mean, this this old maxim of Mark Zuckerberg. Move fast and destroy things. It's a very dangerous maxim in my view, because now it comes closer to law and to democracy, democratic institutions. And so we have to see that this is not only a problem for economy. We are discussing during yesterday and today a lot about competition law and economy, but it's also a problem for democracy. As we can see right now in America, we just have to look what's happening there, because the same model which is used in economics, very successful all over the world, with collection of incredible amounts of data, and as I said, illegal to our standards, is used in the public sphere for the information of citizens. And what happens then if this model is being rolled out in the public sphere, we can see that in America. It's the plurality of democracy is yesterday, and the plurality of bubbles is today and tomorrow. And these companies, they do not feel responsible for what they are doing. And so we have to force them. And yes, finally, again, I think the GDPR is wonderful. It's a new gold standard, but we have an enforcement problem and an implementation problem, and we should discuss what to do to fill this gap.
Thank you very much. Teemu?
Yeah, maybe I can just build on that. Great to be here, and thanks for inviting. Great to be outside of your own country. So I bring greetings from Finland, and as is known, Finns are reserved. So I will start with a three-word summary. So basically 3 words regarding the GDPR. I think triumph, frustration, and hope. And maybe if I can elaborate on that with just a little bit of context. So I come from My Data Global. It's an international organization. It has a lot of these small fish that we talked about, organizations from all over the world, data experts from all over the world who believe in the vision that individuals should have better control, better agency over their personal data. And why I say triumph, just like my predecessor said, of course, the GDPR has been a gold standard. And when we talk with colleagues around the world, be it companies or be it other nonprofits or people, they look up, of course, to see that, okay, EU is becoming a regulatory superpower in the space. Yes, we've had the great data protection laws before in many countries, but now it's unified and it's happening, and other countries are using that as an example, as we know in the GDPR report. It's a fundamental right, and that of course we can be triumphant about and be happy that most people are aware of their rights according to research. Of course, we don't know the details of GDPR. Not even the experts will know everything, but most people are aware of the rights. But the frustration, of course, I think the frustration of most people is really the kind of incomprehensible terms of service and other yes, I've read it, and yes, I accept that we still need to bear with. The other frustration is coming from many of those small fish businesses which have believed that yes, they can do ethical business based on combining personal data from multiple sources, utilizing, for example, the data portability right that you mentioned, but that's not really happening. So those businesses which have been based on and are betting on this ethical or fair data economy are not really taking off yet. So that's the frustration bit. And then the hope. Of course, we realize that it will take some time. And right now, of course, on the roadmap, very interesting things from the Commission outlined in the report and elsewhere. Some of the proposals going on. For example, making the data portability more real time. For example, having these data facilitators or intermediaries or my data operators, as we call them, getting those kind of defined and functioning. So that, of course, gives us a lot of hope that it's we've merely scratched the surface, but that there is also a lot happening right now. In terms of, if the question was that has the GDPR empowered, I think we've merely scratched the surface so far.
Thank you very much. And Paul-Olivier over the video, please.
Yes.
It's your turn.
So, hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
So it's essentially, my argument will be essentially the same as all the other panelists, that the law is actually pretty good as a text, as legal text, but the enforcement is severely deficient. So Teemu insisted a little bit about the right to portability, and I want myself to insist on the right of access, which I find extremely important to really transform the ecosystem. There was some mention of the regulator's budget and all of those aspects. I think the right of access is actually a cost-saving measure for regulators. It's driven by individuals and civil society to encourage more transparency and empowers us collectively to frame the problems around data in our own terms. And I don't think this has been completely understood by regulators, actually, and by those who should be putting pressure on them, this transformative power of the right of access. Now, that right is not magical in itself. It's not like an individual would ask for their data and then suddenly the whole data ecosystem would make sense to them. It needs really an ecosystem of transparency to be really beneficial. But through the action partly of Personal Data I/O and other similar efforts, we can see that such coalitions, such ecosystems can be formed. So I would pick quickly some examples. There is the case of Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and Professor David Carroll, who basically went after using not GDPR, but the UK Data Protection Act at the time, who went after his Cambridge Analytica profile. And this has led to massive legal efforts, Netflix documentary, several documentaries actually, and very recently he finally got access. So we can see that, I mean, why he was pursuing this. We can see the potential for communications around these efforts is tremendous, and also, of course, the public interest in understanding what this data is. But there are other examples. So there is a French journalist, Judith Duportail, who asked her data from Tinder, and that was really helpful to explain gender problems or gender-related problems around algorithms to a large part of the population, especially in France. Now with Personal Data I/O, we're starting to lead form coalitions around citizen-led investigations and newspapers. The first one should come out in Switzerland very soon. And maybe the most promising effort for change in the near future is around Uber. So I heard that Uber was mentioned in the previous session, but all over Europe, there are starting to be efforts by drivers organized through some kind of labor union 2.0 to actually claim back their data, to actually ask for visibility, so access and portability of their personal data. So they can do all kinds of things with this data.
Okay, thank you very much. So I see we have a common ground here. We all, or like the panelists, think that the law itself was a good thing or still is a good thing, but the problem is the enforcement of the law in order to show the empowerment that is meant to be shown. So we used the word empowerment several times already in the beginning, and the question I would like to ask, especially Teemu, what is empowerment actually? What do we understand when we use this term?
Sure, thanks. That's a great question. I think that word is used a lot, as are many of the words we use, without really properly defining. So let me try to be maybe a little bit provocative here. I think the great cases of Cambridge Analytica, the great cases of the ones that Paul-Olivier mentioned, the great cases of Schrems, have nothing to do with empowerment. Yes, they are absolutely building blocks for that. But for me, that somebody takes a long court action and finally gets that action, that's not really what I would call empowerment, nor is it what we in what's called the My Data Declaration, a collaborative work done by organizations and individuals in the space, define as empowerment. To me, empowerment means, for example, that when I apply for a job, I can take my credentials, I can take my study records, maybe my job history, maybe some other information from various sources, combine these into a digital CV, apply for a job, and change my life. For me, empowerment is that when I'm in trouble with my debts, I can similarly take data from tax, from places I owe, from the banks, and so on, and get legal counseling with that data. It's about really being able to take control of our lives, and of course, in order to do that, that's a long way to go. Of course, we need these fantastic cases. That was not to downplay that, but that's what I mean. That we say that we have merely scratched the surface. We are not seeing these kind of services yet. Of course, we are still just 2 years into the GDPR.
Yeah, so you mentioned some examples that you think are not empowerment in the sense that, like how you understand it, but does anyone maybe else has any examples where it worked or maybe not?
Yeah, I would disagree a little bit, because I think empowerment has something to do with power, and an individual never has the same power than a huge organization, and especially in this field, it's a massive asymmetry in knowledge and in information, and if there are companies they know more about you than yourself, and your best friends or your wife and anything else, and they store everything and they build a profile out of you and make predictions about you, what you do next. And maybe they manipulate them even, that you will fulfill this prediction. This is really a very, very unbalanced situation in terms of power, and therefore we need a very strict answer. And one of the answers is that we have a law. We have still a rule of law in Europe. I mean, this is really something which is very, very important, as we see today in what's happening in the world. And besides that, the other two things that we have is democracy and is human rights and fundamental rights. And we should stick very close to that. And we have the institutions that help us come along with these rights. And we need them, and therefore the jurisdiction of the High European Court was very important in my view. And what is needed to empower really the individuals and the citizens? As we said in the beginning, first of all, politics have to stick to them. So why does not the EU, I repeat, take action after this jurisdiction and forces the American companies to store their data here in Europe? I mean, they already built the infrastructure. They invested billions of dollars after the Snowden case. So it would be possible, but nobody is forcing them to do that. So they go on with their illegal model, and they say they just take it, and they, like they did all the time before, just, act and then see what's up. There's no responsibility. There is so far nothing that we can rely on in this case. So, and the other thing is we need technology to help us to empower ourselves, and therefore, and it's the same. I think it's the same context, because if you will enable the good guys, what you mentioned with technology for the people, you have to be hard to the bad guys before. So otherwise you won't have a fair competition. As long as they can use their illegal model to build their power, it's impossible for everybody else who sticks to the law. And that's really a bad situation in my view. So both cases, technology and politics, they have to stick together. What we need is a very strict enforcement of the law done by the politics, and then we need, on the other hand, a strengthens of the technology firms, and this will really be very good for startups if they have really a chance against these big companies.
This, just to add that, this idea of empowerment, of user empowerment, also should be reflected and headed to in the law and in the wording of the law. In Germany, since decades, we talk when we talk of users, we talk of affected persons, affected by data processing. I like much more the European wording of a data subject, because a person shouldn't be an object of data processing, it should be the subject. He or she is the data provider. He produces the data directly or indirectly. So he should be the core of it and not only be an object. But concerning the question of use cases, do we see empowerment cases yet? Frankly, I don't think so. I don't think so. Perhaps.
Okay, please, on the other side of our connection. Now we have two.
Yeah. Sorry. So I would like to say that I disagree with what Teemu said, and I agree more with what Mathias said. So empowerment is not convenience, but it's autonomy to adapt to a changing environment. That's how I understand empowerment. If circumstances change around you, then you can take what you have and you can adapt to that. A prerequisite for it is access to meaningful information. Now, the words I'm using there are not random. Meaningful information is already in the GDPR. That's a very good thing tied to AI and logic of the processing information about algorithms. And this autonomy to adapt to a changing environment and the relation to meaningful information, you can give actually pretty good mathematical or physical definitions of this around the utility of information in general. And this access to meaningful information is very important because in order to fight collective effects, you need to make essentially what is a political case, because personal data represents power indeed, and reappropriating that resource, reappropriating that personal data, or taking back control over that personal data as a resource means you can start to play a game of redistribution of power, which is essentially politics. So these things are all tied together, but we should not lose track of what is downstream effect, the convenience, and that might be encouraged by the economy and larger forces, and the true enabler, which is this empowerment and this access to meaningful information.
Thank you.
I forgot to say about Uber. So the case with Uber is exactly this, because the case with Uber is about Uber drivers getting together to get back their data from Uber, get a copy, so that they can then make a case that they ought to get more wages, like they're underpaid basically because they're working so many hours. They can make the case that Uber's business model that is driven by having an oversupply of drivers is actually polluting their city. They can collectivize the data they accumulate about rides and about demand for rides at different places at different times. They can collectivize this data and then enter into political negotiations with their cities to leverage a better access to this data for the collective interest, but also to preempt Uber leveraging this exact same data in order to push their own interests. And all these things, we can start to see collective dynamics around these efforts. They should absolutely not be thought of as individual dynamics. These drivers are getting together, they're forming coherent strategies all over Europe, aiming towards essentially Amsterdam, because that's Uber's headquarters in Europe.
So maybe I can just build on that. I mean, I think that's a fantastic example of where then your rights that we have fought for and are defined are then becoming actionable, for real, and are empowering. In fact, so definitely agree with that. And the Uber case, really interesting one to watch. And in terms of democracy, like for me, and maybe it's splitting hairs, but for me, empowerment is not yet when you get your civil rights or your voting rights or whatever. It's when you actually can vote somebody out who is not really behaving very well in office, for example. So it's a matter of where does that empowerment happen, so to speak.
Yes, the empowerment happens there where autonomy is based, and autonomy is based in the subjects who are able to inform themselves, to have access to valuable information, free access to that, and to discuss openly and build up their own opinions and then make a decision. But if you have, on the opposite, a company which knows everything about you, about the last 15 years of your Google search and everything, and they have a perfect profile of you, and they know exactly what you want. I mean, you can see it every day. If you open up Amazon, they send you immediately their predictions, what you will buy at next. And they even have a patent on that in the US, the predictive shipping is it called, and they even send out the things before you order it. So, I mean, this is really frightening in terms of what happens to political decisions and to autonomy when that happens and when that's really around everywhere. And we should stop that. We should stop that because autonomy of people, of individuals is undermined by that. And with that, law and democracy are undermined. And I mean, we will only have a digital sovereignty, which is the new claim of the new commission, and I hope they will really fulfill, if we have and restore the sovereignty of the individuals and of the citizens, and vice versa, because both are very dependent on each other. I mean, if you don't have clear information and people who are, you know, able to use that clear information. I see what happens now in the corona crisis with the demonstrations and with the conspiracy theories and all that stuff. We must see that these kind of information is based on the same principles than the economic algorithms that are doing predictions about our consumer behavior. And they do it as well about the political behavior, and they are absolutely constructed to help polarization, emotionalization, and they are against facts and against the truth. And we see what happens in democracies that have a weaker public press system than we do have here in Europe, and especially in Germany. And this really frightens me, and I think we should act now and should act clearly and enforce the law that we have. We have a good law, and this is the best empowerment for people that we can imagine.
So I just want to clarify, as I understood, that most of you think that there hasn't been much change since the GDPR was introduced when it comes to the participation of people, to empowerment of the people. Let aside those cases, like few cases that we have, and here we could also ask, was it the GDPR that empowered the Uber drivers, for example, or was it maybe something else? So what do you think? Do we see any change since the GDPR? Is the GDPR the reason for the development in those areas? Or maybe there are other cases, like Facebook or whatever. Paul, you look like, I don't hear, you should, you are still silent.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so Cambridge Analytica, the scandal exploded in March 2018, and I think that had some part in people's awareness around the problems of personal data and the way it's handled right now. The GDPR arrived in May, so the two of the efforts collided, if you want, in my view at least. But I do think there was a change. There was a change in many, more than just a small sample I give, in many citizens' heads of what rights they had and how they could act in the digital space. The reality is that the moment they start acting in that space, they are disappointed by regulators, essentially, lack of enforcement. So there has been a change, but authorities have, in a sense, failed them at enforcing the law.
Maybe I can build on that. Maybe in some way, if we think of the hype curve, we've kind of come down maybe from the hype, and exactly that these rights are not yet actionable as we'd like to see, and they are still mostly formal rights. Of course, there are some some kind of good cases of things being actionable. Of course, companies are developing around that. We've got in our ecosystem dozens of companies who are acting as facilitators, dozens of companies who are acting as either kind of data sources or as kind of data using services in line with the data portability and in line with GDPR. But as said, they are still relatively small fish compared to the big ones, and definitely need both to support in meaningful ways the small fish, to feed them, so to speak, but also take care of the big fish. And I think much of the discussion, for example, yesterday, rightfully so, was around the big fish.
I think with the GDPR, the European Union has gained power on a global scale, and the data protection authorities has grown teeth also. We had significant fines, and just today in Hamburg, one of the smallest of the federal states in Germany, the data protection authority announced to impose a fine on H&M. It's a clothes retailer in Germany, of 35 million euros because they surveilled their workforce illegally. So the possibilities are there. Of course, the majorities of users ask what is done against the practices of Facebook and all those GAFAM members. And there we have to see how is action taken, how the coherence worked. We have this new European Data Protection Board where the DPAs of Europe should align their views and their enforcement. And concerning Facebook, just to name it again, it's up to Ireland to act because there is their European headquarters. And now the DPC Ireland has some people would say has woken up because they now say, well, this transatlantic data transfers of data coming from European users, there might be no basis for that after the Privacy Shield went down. And as the alternatives are no real alternatives, if you look at the power the US authorities and agencies still have. So there is something going on, and users, I think they will see this progress.
Yeah, before, right in the beginning, Mathias said that there are 7 companies who are sharing the market. And what you also mentioned, that also the others, that there is lots of unfair practices actually everywhere on the internet and other digital formats that we face. And also consumers, they face kind of a lock-in effect in this case. And the question is, why is it happening? Is there not enough competition on the market? Why are they, like, is that the reason, or maybe there are other reasons why it happens? I don't see Paul, but maybe you want to start.
The network effect is very widely expressed and described, and it's very powerful. And as I said, I mean, we have to have a very holistic view on these kind of technologies. We should not only look, for example, at AI or internet or 5G or whatever. We should really discuss that in a holistic context, because these technologies empower each other, and one is based on the other. I mean, the more data you have, the better your AI is, because it needs big data, and they have already collected it. And I mean, it's just the very good claim of this conference. The winner takes it all. That's the logic of these platforms, and that's the logic of the network effect. And it took a long time really to understand what that meant, because it leads to a tremendous concentration of power. And this power is really concentrated, and I mean, it's obviously that we have to concentrate the authorities as well. For example, in Europe, we need a very strong European regulation authority to be at the same level, at least, with them. But on the other side, we have to see that this concentration is, on the other side, not a natural law or natural science or something like that. It is made because it was not regulated. The internet was not regulated over 20, over 30 years. it was always the free cyberspace and the ideology of John Barry Barlow and others who claimed that there were, we don't need any laws. And in the end, they said, yeah, we need some rules, but we give us to ourselves and so on and so on. The self-regulation has completely failed in that field. And it took people and societies and democracies a long time really to get aware of what was happening. And maybe this is one of the reasons why we are very late, but we are not too late. For example, we should fill in the new legislation, for example, some rules that are really, that really break them up. And they break up, for example, the lock-in effect. In our book, we have one idea that the interconnectivity should come. So we should force them to open up, for example, platforms like Facebook for other competitors, so that you can, with your customers and your clients, you can go into Facebook, into their network, but you can rule your data with your clients as you defined it and as you pointed it out with them. And for example, I mean, nobody goes to a network where nobody else is in. Not even Woody Allen would do that.
Yeah, let me build on that a little bit. I think you said earlier about the network effect. There was earlier a discussion also about the knowledge effect, and that was exactly about the asymmetries and the companies knowing more and more about you. Which also in the My Data Declaration we want to balance out into more balanced power relationships. Then I think the other thing that was discussed earlier was this fact that we don't want to just break up companies, and this was we were talking about the lazy banks. That if you just break up big ones and you get more lazy ones, that's not the point. But rather get the small and faster movers, and also being able to compete and collaborate. And that's of course where the data spaces and the kind of networks of smaller players and their kind of interoperability and collaboration becomes very, very vital, and luckily we have some good sessions later on coming up on that one.
I don't see Paul.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. So I think one of the important elements around competition is, again, to understand that things like the network effect, the knowledge effect, are it's toxic to them, this transparency. Whenever I go on the web and I'm tracked by Google Analytics, and this data goes somewhere that then is fed into Google's bidding algorithms, a bunch of people get access to my data, and some more data gets produced. I have rights over this data. This is the argument I would develop. I would have rights over this data. Of course, it would be extremely difficult for Google to respect my rights in this here. So the message is that the GDPR should be applied fairly, and fairly between companies means that it should be applied strictly. Otherwise, you see a race to the bottom in terms of privacy and respect for users. And strictly means also that the compliance costs are much higher for big companies that do not have the interest of the users in mind. If your business model is not fully aligned with users, then technical compliance, but also marketing at the public relations level, it gets much harder to be compliant. So just imagine, like, if you go to Google and ask Google, okay, I would like to have a copy of all the consents I've ever given you. Well, Google has an obligation to keep that in the GDPR, and you have a right to see it. But what would be your impression if you had this, and if you were able to go around and explain, even just within Brussels, what type of consents Google considers it has and where it gets data from? So same thing with the complexity of data about friendships that Facebook collects. Facebook doesn't just profile users, it profiles also friendships. And this gets really complex in terms of rights, individual rights over this. We shouldn't leave the space for Facebook to decide what right each of us have on Facebook relating to our data, but we should actually decide this collectively. So the right of access can expose this discrepancy most effectively. And so we should encourage users to exercise these rights. Again, I'm repeating the same thing. But the main message is, do not consider those requests as esoteric. Some of them have a real purpose, and they're trying to point at real problems And they're even systematically trying to bring evidence to the table and to advance collective understanding of the problem. Again, echoing the words of the GDPR, they're trying to provide meaningful information about the logic of the processing of the data around them. So if I take a personal example, I think it was in around May or maybe May 2018, I testified at the UK Parliament. In the end, I testified also about Cambridge Analytica, but the reason for the invitation originally was some really esoteric request I had made to Facebook because I thought it was really important about the custom audiences that Facebook had classified me in, or the lookalike audiences, or the browsing history had logged through a Facebook pixel all over the web. Well, now there are dozens of journalists who are pushing Facebook for more transparency on those topics because they realize it's essential for people to understand more deeply the problems. And people here means simultaneously politicians, business leaders, users. It's a large array of people who can better understand the issues if we have this effective transparency.
Yeah, so it looks to me as it was more than just one piece of law like GDPR is, but like really a real strategy for Europe that goes beyond this law, and it's a much bigger thing. And but like we are on the one side actually asking for more, for deeper, or more empowerment, deeper understanding of the issue. But there is also the other side, and there are many businesses who are complaining already, and who are who think that this might be a comparative disadvantage for European companies. Why do they think this way, or what do you think about this? Matthias?
Yes, I think that this is a process of a new mindset that we should help to develop. I mean, we should be as proud as we are here in this round on the GDPR to the European standards, and the European economy is driven by competition. And competition says that, I mean, that you have a fiction of a market, which you have free information and everybody can has access to it and can compete and can build up new products and stuff like that. What's going on at the GAFAM is the opposite of that. It's a monopoly game, and it's really a monopoly game. I mean, if you look, for example, for two protagonists like Peter Thiel, he is very openly speaking about that competition is bad and monopolies are very good and much better for economy, because it's closer to this kind of perfection that he has in mind, which is always only driven by economical superpower and by technological perfection. This is, and he even said more of that. He said that he sees a deadly race between the democracy and the technology. And these people, I mean, this is really a strange ideology, and it's really dangerous in my view, because if we have a race between technology and democracy, and we have the logic of the winner takes it all, what happens if technology wins? I mean, Peter Thiel is very much convinced that technology will win, and we have to set up the standards here in Europe that we are, and that our business models are based on fundamental rights of people, and as I said, on human rights, on democracy, and of the rule of law, and that we follow these rights. And that will make us, in the long way, that I'm convinced about that, much stronger than these people with their omni-power dreams can imagine. Because, I mean, nobody really wants to live in a world like what they imagine, or what a technology, absolutely technology society would be. So people like to be free and like to stay free, and that's what I believe, and we should see that this is a very good argument for technology made in Europe.
I think a major key to break up monopolies in the global data market lies in competition policy. I think it's useless to hope that data protection law will break up monopolies in the mid or long term. We saw this trial to put an element of competition policy into the GDPR with the right to data portability. And the lawmakers hoped that the users themselves will break up the monopoly by porting their data to other players. And users said, where to? To eBay, to Twitter? There's no use. There's no other social network with that power, that number of users than Facebook, so that trial failed. And it's no use to leave it up to users to fight for more competition. I think that would, that's not the empowerment we think of. We can wait for the users to gain.
Yeah, I want to give the last 2 words to Teemu and Paul-Olivier, and then we will come to the questions from the audience. So Teemu, please.
All right.
Just in 5 minutes we have to close. So if you have questions, maybe now. So to be captured, but really shortly. Professor Kerber, I see over there, but really short.
I have a question to implementation and enforcement of the GDPR. We have in competition policy discussions that the traditional competition policy is too slow, and therefore we are now in the discussions. This was a topic yesterday, really, of thinking about ex-ante regulation of platforms, about new competition tools. Now my question is, what is now really happening at the data protection side? Do they also think about how they can really make it much faster, really implementing the GDPR? Because we are frustrated it's going too slow. And what we can do more, especially also in regard to institutional setup of enforcement of the GDPR.
Who wants to answer?
Maybe we gathered all the questions and who was, please?
Just a short one for Frederick on that point you just made about GDPR. Do you think that it was the consumers who kind of failed in being able to implement this kind of competition breakup through Article 20, or it's the Article 20 right, which just simply isn't strong enough? Like, you've got to wait 30 days. Who wants to wait 30 days for anything these days?
I would like to shine a little light on one of the blind spots that hasn't been mentioned here in the shortcomings of the GDPR. First of all, I have to agree with a lot of things that have been said, but I have to disagree with one thing that Mr. Pffefer said, that the GDPR is the gold standard of privacy. I think it's the copper standard, and we raised it up from scrap metal to copper, right? I mean, I don't want to shun the GDPR completely, but I want to say that it has reached a couple of milestones, but it has not managed to isolate the essential dysfunctionality in our privacy legislation, which is the informed consent. The GDPR has tried to patch everything around the informed consent, but it hasn't managed to isolate this dysfunctionality.
Excuse me, what is your question?
This is the question. Okay, this is a matter. This informed consent is a matter of consumer choice, and this is a matter of economics, all right? And I think that there were way too many lawyers and way too little economists in there. So, and I think if you look at economics, you will find that there is a whole back end of measures for the cure of market failure due to information of asymmetries that has been completely ignored. Another question, if you would go back 5 years and redo the GDPR all over again, what would you do? And do you disagree on or do you agree on my analysis about this shortcoming of not looking at the economic perspective as a whole?
Yeah, I really liked what Paul-Olivier said before. Do not underestimate the transformative power of the right to access your data. I just think it's time for a next step. So GDPR gave us the rights to access our data, but now it's time to give us the means to express those rights. And I think we can do it by creating soft infrastructure that has rules for everybody, rules of the road. I do not so much agree with that it's about data localization. Actually, I'm quite convinced it's not. But I think if we could create a level playing field in which we create common means for the consent to data and a universal agreements on how we deal with data, and that's what we need to learn, how to deal with data. And I guess my question is, I'm already seeing you looking. I guess my question is, what's your view on I think we've got a great moment in time now to create such soft infrastructure. And I would be very happy to learn the views of the gentleman on this, or of some women in the audience.
Okay, I don't see more questions here, so I would like to address those 3 questions to our panelists. What can we do to make make it faster? Like it was the first question from Professor Kerber.
Yes, it's concerning the pace of enforcement. We have the problem of potentially 27 different views on how to enforce the GDPR. Of course, that is a problem, that's a challenge. We have to have more harmonization, more speed in the processes. This is basically built in the GDPR, this coherence mechanism, those one-stop mechanism. But of course, practice is lagging behind the idea. German authorities waited years for the Irish to act against Facebook, and we were we waited for action to come. Now action is going on, but it took years. Concerning your question, no, the users are not to blame. The users are not to blame. It is a structural problem, especially data portability. You cannot say, please port, please practice, please foster competition by porting your data. If they have no idea about the functionality, about the compatibility issues, they are left alone with this new right. It sounds good, but and this depends also on the shortcomings you ask for. We would need to have a right to interoperability built in this portability, the addition. The first step is to have your data portable, and the second step is that you can use it at the provider you have ported it to. Otherwise, it will be useless. And concerning Mr. Herwig's point on consent, yes, I totally agree. The concept of informed consent is broken. Perhaps it's totally broken. We have too less data literacy with the users. We have too less awareness. So the users are left alone again. The providers can say, well, the information is provided. Article 13 is fulfilled. You have all the information. Please decide. Yes. And then the user has to decide. And he has to read and understand and weigh and decide. That's a challenge. That is not, users are not capable of that.
Dear panelists, you have seen the sign where the keynote is waiting, so
I didn't want to get all the answer time. Please.
But you addressed all the questions, and I'm sure that all of you could contribute even more to those questions, but we will have to postpone it to the break or to maybe an online discussion later on, and I want to pass the microphone to Pencho to introduce the keynote. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Many thanks.
Good day.
We received the message that we are looking for the lady, and the lady is waiting, and that's why I don't want to prolong the discussion. And I hope Jeni Tennison is listening to us. Jeni, of course, I saw you. We can't imagine a European Data Summit without a representative of the really renewed Open Data Institute from the UK. We had in the past Sir Shedbolt, we had David Biamo, we had Jack, we had Leigh Dodds, and it's really sad that this year really strange because of Corona, but still I really appreciate that you have found time to address really important issue, and that's that's the concept of trustworthy and sustainable data institutions. The virtual floor is yours, Jeni.
Thank you very much, Penja, and I'm really sorry to be interrupting what was a really interesting discussion. So apologies for that. I'm just going to try to share my screen. So hopefully our security preferences.
We wait just a couple of minutes. I am sure that Jeni is going to fix the problem. Otherwise, I have a suggestion that maybe, Jeni, you try without the presentation. I think it started well. I was so confident. Paul.
If I have the opportunity, I want to continue on the previous panel. So I want to say that there are codes of conduct in the GDPR that are a way, so Article 40.2.f, that are a way to move faster on those topics. That's it. And now, Jeni, your turn.
Thanks for your support, Paul. Really appreciate it. Jeni, perfect. It works. It looks good.
You can see it okay, and you can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Perfect. I'm very sorry for that. I had to reboot the application in order to get screen sharing working. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me today, and I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you in person. I'm really going to concentrate on the topic of data institutions, which I think for me is one of the enabling mechanisms and technologies and governance structures that can help us realize some of the issues that I know that you've been talking about over the last few days and will be talking about around competition and collective power, around business to business sharing of data, around public data and open data. And I want to share with you some of the research and thinking that we've been doing at the ODI around how to make data institutions work, how to make them trustworthy, how to make them sustainable. So just like a bunch of necessary slides. So if you don't know the ODI, we're founded in 2012. We're a not-for-profit based in the UK, and our mission is to work with companies and governments to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem. We believe that data is only powerful in that it creates impact in the world, where you have multiple people, communities, businesses, public sector, third sector, making decisions using data. And that we need to create an environment where it's possible for there to be lots of tools and products and services and analyses that help to support those decision makers, so that they can make more informed decisions, make faster decisions. And of course, getting data to those people through those tools is absolutely essential. So the organizations that steward data, that hold it, maintain it, and make it available, making them work well is really essential. So we often say that data is infrastructure. We should be thinking of our data ecosystem and our data assets as if we were building a road network and investing in it, and the policies and governance frameworks around it in the same way as we do other kinds of forms of infrastructure and physical infrastructure. So when we talk about data being infrastructure, we care about the data sets themselves that are to us like roads, the standards and technologies that you use to make them, the policies and guidance like rules of the road or standardized road signs that help you to understand how to use data. The data stewards and institutions, which is what I'm going to really drill into here, and also the stakeholders and communities, the people who are affected by the collection and use of data. So the part that is of real interest if we view data as infrastructure, are these data stewards and institutions. They're the people that maintain and manage data for the rest of us. At ODI, then we've been looking at the different kinds of access models that are made available for data. And this is our map that we've put together of kind of all of the different key terms that people use about providing access to data, from the really technical ones over on the top left there, like in Technicaledonia, things like dashboards and APIs, through to the personal data stores on the right there, that are used to steward and maintain data that is about people. The piece where data institutions live is in this middle island, Calabrador. It's the place where we've structured the kinds of organizations or approaches that collaboratively maintain data, that enable collaborative access to data or greater access to data by more people. And there are some of them that are more kind of technically minded, so data platforms and repositories and hubs and portals. There are some that are more market focused, so marketplaces and exchanges and so forth. But the ones that we're really interested in are the ones that are oriented around new forms of governance that we put on the governor's aisle. So they're things like data trusts, data cooperatives, clubs, commons, these kinds of concepts that give us different ways of thinking about the governance, the collective governance of data. So those for us are the data institutions. We define them as organizations whose purpose involves stewarding data on behalf of others. So they're doing it for a community, and they usually have a purpose that is around unlocking economic benefit or unlocking social value. There are different kinds and flavors of these kinds of organizations. We see some that are holding data on behalf of other organizations or people or groups of people, and then sharing it for use for particular purposes. We see others that are there in order to that act as hubs, really, to help to provide insights across the sector and other kinds of services across the sector, to be a kind of neutral convener for data. And to provide those services back, so for example, benchmarking services back to the set of organisations involved. And we also see data institutions that are maintaining common infrastructure and often open data. So ones like OpenStreetMap, for example, or Wikidata, that are maintaining common infrastructure that anybody can access and use and share. And where the maintenance of that data is a collaborative activity by multiple people, organizations, communities. So data institutions for us is a very broad term that captures the idea of these organizations whose role in the ecosystem is to make data more accessible on behalf of some kind of community. And the ones that we first started looking at were data trusts, and actually this diagram that we put together to explain how data trust works actually works for a lot of these other types of data institution as well. The setup is basically that you have data providers in that green pyramid over there, who have some data that they have collected. You have a bunch of data users in the red cylinder, the pinkish cylinder over on the right, who could really benefit from having access to that data in order to create new products and services or innovate or just gain insight. And you also have the world, right? You have people about whom data is being collected, or people that will benefit from those products and services and tools. And the data institution, the yellow circle at the top there, is really about brokering those different kinds of interests from those different kinds of players in the ecosystem to help data users get hold of the data that they really want to get hold of, without putting too much of a burden on data providers and actually putting a bit of a gateway on data providers from getting data to those data users, and also bearing in mind the real interests of the people who are going to be affected by the use of data or about whom the data is about. Now, the kind of field of data institutions and new kinds of governance models and organizational structures for these kinds of bodies is a real hot topic around data policy. And we see lots of interest in concepts like data trusts and cooperatives and data unions and so on. But one thing that we like to emphasize is that there are actually a whole bunch of data institutions that already exist. There are already these organizations that we can learn from. So 3 examples that we draw out: UK Biobank is a organization set up to steward genetic data, make it available for research purposes. HILO is a data institution set up in the maritime sector that draws together data about shipping accidents and then provides benchmarks back to those shipping companies so that they can improve safety in their fleets. Creative Diversity Network, a small data institution that pulls together data about the diversity, so ethnic diversity, gender diversity, disability diversity in broadcast media. So there are already these data institutions that we can learn from. And what we learn when we talk to them is that what they're there for, what they do is obviously increase access to data, enabling others to work together. But they have a real role balancing these kind of conflicting views and incentives of providers, of users, and of the world. And they can also reduce the cost of stewarding data from those data providers. So sometimes those data institutions are set up because the organizations that originally collect or hold data don't have capacity internally to make it available in all the ways that they would like to. Key features. We find that these data institutions, they need to have some kind of purpose that is really described well, that provides their motivation for making data available. And we find that data institutions are usually quite specific in their purpose. You don't just get a data institution for a huge sector. You get a data institution that is set up specifically, so for example, taking HILO, to help improve safety in the maritime sector by reducing accidents. It's not just one thing for the whole maritime sector. And I think that finding the right kind of level of description of those purposes is something that's really essential. The other 2 aspects are ones that I'm just going to dig into a bit more now, that we need data institutions to be trustworthy and trusted because they're playing this independent role. We need them to gain trust from the community as a whole, and that includes providers, users, as well as people who are affected. And they also need to have some kind of sustainability model, because in order to rely on data that is being shared by them, we need to make sure that they continue to thrive. So we've been digging into those 2 areas, like how do you actually make them sustainable and how do you actually make them trustworthy? Many data institutions get set up with public funding or philanthropic funding in the first instance because designing data institutions, that initial financing step, it requires quite a lot of investment to get communities together, to get agreed standards, to really set up the organization so that it's going to thrive. So there's a financing stage and then there's a funding stage. And during the financing stage, then you really need to work out what the funding model is going to be in order to make sure that it's sustainable. We've been looking at, and our research is highlighting the different kind of data-related revenue and cost models that different kinds of data institutions hold. And just to jump to the last point, one of the things that's most interesting there is the tension between different kinds of revenue models, in particular charging for access to data, and how that is in tension often with organizational purpose, which is a driver towards increasing access to data. Our research has also been highlighting the importance of hosting organisations. So quite often when these institutions are initially set up, they get hosted within another organisation during that very early stage. And that proves essential to really giving them support that they need in their early stages. Our more recent research has been looking at the kinds of things that those kinds of organisations need in order to increase their sustainability. We found that they need to be able to describe their theories of change, and it may be that it's in order to get funding, especially that initial financing, and so maybe exploring having common theories of change, because quite frequently they have common ideas about how they impact on their sector or towards their particular challenge is really important. They need help to work out alternative business models. And what we found is that means unpacking the value exchange with those three different kinds of players within their community, and also with funders. What is it that they're getting back and what are they willing to pay for? And then you can design alternative and innovative business models for those data institutions. And we've also been exploring where shared infrastructure might be able to reduce cost for these new institutions. So, for example, shared infrastructure to help with data management that they have to do, or management of the governance processes that they have to do. And also, they're just organizations, so they need the kind of shared infrastructure around finance and HR and things like that any organization does. So this is interesting to us in terms of what kind of support can we provide in a wider ecosystem, whether it's legislatively or through investment at a more communal level, in order to support these very purposeful data institutions. The other aspect we've been looking at is trustworthiness. And issues around trust, we kind of done a bit of analysis, falls into these four kind of problems when organizations misrepresent what they're up to, when there's misunderstanding about what they're up to, when people just can't tell what they're doing, and when what they do changes over time. And all of those issues arise through poor communication. So addressing communication from data institutions, proactive, open, transparent communication is really essential for building trust. Data institutions play a really important role as brokers of trust. So data users need to trust data providers that the data that they're getting has been sourced ethically, that it's got some good quality around it, for example, at least the quality constraints are articulated. And data institutions as an intermediary broker the trust relationship between the users and the providers. And similarly, data providers need to know that the data users are going to use that data ethically and well and not misinterpret it. So again, these data institutions are a really important broker of that trust relationship. We've also looked within this trustworthy work at the importance of the overall legal environment. So, for example, what kind of safety net is there? And proper legislation, proper enforcement, proper redress mechanisms are essential for helping people to feel trust in these organizations, even if there's only so much that they can do themselves. So the bits that we've been looking at a little bit further and are researching now are where can extra things help to build that trust? Is it professional qualifications for the individuals who are involved in these kinds of institutions? Is it auditing and due diligence? Are there ways of checking the way that data institutions, users, providers work in order to provide extra trust? Or are there more things at the more ecosystem level, like legal and financial protections that need to be in place? New types of insurance, for example, in order to ensure that these institutions can be trusted. So that's it, just a very quick run through of the work that we've been doing around data institutions, and in particular around making them sustainable and trustworthy. As I say, we view these as being real enablers for getting data ecosystems to work well. And that's why we're putting so much effort into trying to unpick how they can operate effectively so that data works for everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Dear Jeni, I hope that the sound reached you in London. Many thanks. This, I think it happened accidentally that we changed the slot and your keynote put it after the session, and it makes perfectly sense. I mean, we have great inspiration now for the lunch, and it was also good preparation for the coming sessions, since we're going to talk concretely on the issue of data trust and data altruism in the context of European strategy on data. We will continue the discussion with Jeni tomorrow in the context of the experiences with the Open Data Institute. As you know, we are advocating really strong similar institution for Germany, and we really appreciate the possibility to discuss the issue tomorrow with her again. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now we have the small break, and we continue at 12:35, I would say. Please enjoy your lunch.